right, I have clicked buttons, and it's probably not. Hello. Okay, it's not doing anything. That's okay. All right, so I'm going to get started here. Today we're going to be talking about increasing accessibility with components and design systems. And I hope to leave you all with some tangible tips and tactics for how you can be more inclusive in how you're approaching design and development with your teams. So Notre Dame was a world-renowned architectural achievement, and it stood the test of time for over 900 years. On the evening of April 15th, 2019, disaster struck. A fire began raising quickly and went to the North Tower. After much analyses, we now know that it was likely a short circuit that started the fire. However, the amount of damage that happened could have been averted. What we know after reviewing and talking with many people that were there that day is the cathedral's complex fire system was responsible for the high amount of damage that resulted. A security guard was making rounds on that night of April 15th, and he was presented this alphanumeric code. How many of you can discern what this code means? This complex code that was presented to him with a module that he looked at sent him directions. So it was a key basically that gave him the location of the fire, the steps he was supposed to take to get there, and then what he was supposed to do when he got to that other part of the fire system. This would have been, perfectly fine information, except he went to the wrong tower. So because he didn't make it to that tower, the fire continued. And to this day, restoration to try to bring this beautiful architectural experience back to what it was is still happening. It's going to take roughly 9 years. So maybe by about 2030, give or take, we should have something that resembles that. But this was a perceived human failure. It would have been very easy to blame that guard. He could have been faster. He could have been better trained. Could have he learned the information better if he had studied harder? What was at the center of this disaster was that the system was unusable. Notre Dame spent millions of dollars on this fire system, millions upon millions of dollars, and it resulted in almost $1 billion of damage. And it failed because the code was inaccessible and was not inclusive of its primary user. That primary user was a human that was in a high-stress situation. So hello everyone, my name is Mary Blabaum. I am a senior UX manager at Acquia. And so I am very jazzed, as you can tell, to talk about inclusive design. My journey to understanding human-centered design started 9 years ago. Acquia today serves the market with digital experiences, and this includes scaling your sites, including our Drupal cloud functionality. We also have a digital asset management platform and more. And I'm just really delighted here to be with all of you in the Drupal community. I think it's really neat that we have this opportunity where design and development are intersecting. Early in my UX career, I was very focused on a project for our DAM. DAM is Digital Asset Management, which is basically a structured content and data system on steroids. So if you think of your Google Drive and you've got a little bit of metadata that come with your images, that cataloging can be blown out into a master system, which can serve, independent sites all the way up through large enterprise systems. For the content that my team was designing, or what housed the content, to be usable, it must be accessible. And this is whether we were designing native software apps on the right, like our new search experience, or on the left. This is our DAM integration module for Drupal, which is available and you are able to use. So content should be accessible with only your keyboard, findable with just your voice, and readable by assistive technology like a screen reader. On that development team I mentioned that I was on, we had an agreement, and this agreement was to make everything that we touched better. This held us accountable to making continuous improvements. It made us consider the user needs and think of humans first in our design process. And that in itself enabled us to be much more inclusive of our larger user base. The convergence of usability and accessibility is inclusive design. This means designing for humans, how we are each different and how our behavior can evolve and change over time. Inclusive design, regardless of what path you take it down, always comes back to humans. And there are 7 human factors for inclusivity. These are all things we can celebrate: diversity, language, gender, age, culture, ability, and environment. And I think we've all faced some fun environmental challenges this week as we've been navigating this university, dealing with noises, but also been able to enjoy the environment we're in by networking, enjoying the culture of those around us, and immersing ourselves in design and technology. After considering those 7 factors, there are 3 key considerations that we can break these into when aligning them to delivering digital experiences. The first is we need to be considerate of impairments. We then need to be considerate of the environment, and we also need to be inclusive of assistive technologies. So I want to do a quick exercise. I'm looking for a raise of hands. Have you or someone you know broken their arm? I see that the majority of us have had someone who knows someone who's had that, and you or they have experienced a temporary disability. In time you healed. Typically a broken arm is something that likely won't result in surgery, and after several weeks you're able to then regain your motor skills. But during that time, what was once easy was then maybe challenging without assistance. And if you've broken your arm, it was likely challenging to type, especially if you broke your dominant hand. Voice recognition is an assistive technology feature. This feature can benefit users with temporary or long-term loss of mobility and dexterity. In contrast to temporary disabilities, long-term impairments do not resolve. Examples of this can be hearing loss, loss of vision, losing a limb. And a common misconception is that accessibility-focused products are designed for humans with long-term impairments. A brand that challenged this, starting with accessibility-first design, is OXO. I don't know about you, but I love cooking. And I am in love with my OXO salad spinner. This gets used so much that I am on my 2nd. In 8 years, I have gone through that many salad spinners. As embarrassing as that might be that I eat that much lettuce, this tool is a delightful experience every time that I take it out. And so, what has made myself and others love this brand so much? OXO, as a kitchen tool-focused brand, innovated on accessibility. And in this image you see, going from right to left, some of the different prototypes that they had moved through during the design process. And as they improved upon their design, they introduced a grip for users with motor skill limitations. They tried shortening or elongating the handles to give better leverage and balance. As you're using a tool like a peeler, it is imperative that you do not put it towards you where you might nick yourself. It's also important to have a steady hand. And so they had to get the weight of the device right. And as you can see at the top, they further rounded out that edging to ensure that you could avoid injury. When these tools made it into the hands of the general public, it became clear that there was value to all users. This was not just for users with motor impairments. This is for anyone who wanted to have a more delightful culinary experience. The second impairment that you can design for intention with is situational. Consumers of experiences you create might be limited by factors. This could be like a noisy area that you're in. Many of you took the train here, some of us took planes, and that can cause temporary auditory noise that makes it so you can't discern what's happening. That air conditioner, that is a fantastic example, and it has bamboozled many of us throughout this conference. But an example here is a few weeks ago I was on a phone call and my AirPods died. I had thrown out my legacy phone jack because I was so confident in my new AirPod purchase. So I hope none of you have thrown that away and experienced that. But what that did in that moment was give me a situational impairment. I couldn't hear the other person on the other end of the line. They were a busy talker like I am, and I missed out on a very important part of their story and was completely lost in that moment when I came back. The last factor we have here is environment. And this is a factor that we all experienced evolving over the course of the pandemic. People went from working on portable laptops or devices like we've brought to the conference to having these well-established working spaces. And this caused some interesting effects on how we were designing technology or designing any digital experience. It made our canvas a different scale. We had to accommodate for different media queries. And this just really emphasized the importance of responsiveness and knowing how are my users engaging with this experience ultimately. I'm assuming that everyone in this audience has at least 1 to 3 devices on you at this moment. Those could be, a laptop, some kind of smartwatch, a cell phone, maybe you have multiple, and then a tablet. And each of these can perform assistive technology-related tasks. Many of them have this built directly into their OS system. And if you don't have Zscaler or a security thing on my computer like I do, you're also then able to use closed captioning and other nice features, not nice, I should say, imperative features to help everyone be able to experience things equally. Like our example earlier, voice-to-speech is a form of assistive technology that benefits every person that can interact with it mostly. Modern devices are a fantastic example of how to be more inclusive as we're scaling technologies. These considerations enable you to effectively begin to develop inclusive experiences. And now that we've kind of formatted these different realms of consideration, we're going to jump into how you can do these things in your day-to-day. The first step is generating empathy. Throughout this conference, I think I have heard the word kindness used more than I have ever heard in a space where there's a gathering of individuals. And kindness is a core construct or motivator of why we empathize. We want to connect with each other. We want to connect with people. And as our keynote called out yesterday, putting humans first in that design process. We are not designing with our opinions. We are designing for the people that we are serving. And design is, like I said, all about empathy. And oftentimes, this can stop at that user research cycle. I think the design process has probably come up many times throughout this conference. But visualizing it, there's always this early part where you're really thinking about the problem space and the user needs and the requirements. And sometimes that just falls off after that. It's then instead of being Andy the builder, and we're talking about that he needs dark mode and might suffer from migraines because of that. We then are just we've got to do feature X, and it takes this much time, and we're scoping it this way. And what that does is it takes the human out of the conversation. So generating empathy is a challenge that you'll face throughout the design process. And a way to really do this is continue to revisit that user's perspective. So to get traction in this space, the first is having a genuine approach. Showing up with the true intention to serve your audience. Whether you know how to do that or not, coming in humbly and with the aptitude to learn and support others is the right place to start. Leveraging tools, information, and outlets to share your passion. When you have inferences and learning, share them with those around you. And the last is growing your network capabilities. How many of you have made a connection during this conference? I feel like I've made so many, I wish I had more arms. And I think it's great to see how, just in the limited time we've been together, we've networked. And I know that there are many people here I'll be reaching out to with questions on all sorts of topics, including accessibility. Personas are a familiar tool for many designers. I know we had a speaker that talked about them yesterday, and I want to be respectful of there are many ways to paint a picture about your users. There are archetypes, there are user stories, there's user canvases, storyboards. But really what this is a representative of an individual that we're building an experience for. And this tool should be used to empathize. These aren't like cold lines of things like Pam needs to have a button that allows her to download the things. It's that Pam needs to be able to share content with users and consumers of her brand. But here what we're calling out are what we call accessibility lenses. So you'll see in the upper right corner of that screenshot on the left that I'm calling out dark mode. And the reason that dark mode is so important to Pam is that she suffers from migraines. She has reoccurring headaches, and this makes her sensitive to light. So when designing experiences for her, you may not have dark mode, enabled in your library, your developer environment. That might be a later phase in what you're creating. But there are other ways you can accommodate that or think about it. Creating right levels of contrast, making sure the screens aren't too busy, and that you're being cognizant of other facets that make the experience more perceivable and easy to use. So like I said, accessibility lens framing, it uses those same considerations that we've been leaning into. The impairments, the environment, and the assistive technology. The example I have here is about the assistive technology lenses. This could be screen reader, closed captioning, speech to text, zoom, dark mode, and high contrast. And the way that you can use these is almost like a battle card. I've had teams print these out, put them on stickies. We've used them during workshops, and what it really helps us do is connect with that user. These also make great requirements. So as you're transitioning, whether you're working in a team environment or whether you're working solo on a project, sketching out, okay, I'm working through this homepage, and what's really important is ensuring that I have the right adjustable facets in place for my responsive so that my users can zoom, so they can read the content across their devices. As they zoom in on the browser, it's displaying things appropriately. And then the last step to generating empathy is networking to share your passion. Like I mentioned, connecting with people, consulting. I can't tell you how many times I have had to approach someone and be like, I've used my extensions, or I've done this thing, and something is just not right. Like my focus state just doesn't seem as perceivable. What are your suggestions? Whether that's something more aesthetic-based or more technically based, having people that you can lean into, a community like this one, to connect with. Attend conferences, meetups, and immerse yourself in spaces where people care about inclusivity. There's this saying, and this is very popular on the internet right now, is you're the sum of X number of people that you put around you. And I don't know, that's here or there, you can believe it or feel it however you so choose. But I do strongly believe that those you're with influence you. And so if you are in spaces where people are kind, inclusive, and care about others, you will ultimately be more drawn to create spaces like that. And if you work for a company that does that, or you partner with other individuals, and you interact with great communities like the Drupal community, you will make a difference by just being a part of groups and opportunities where this is top of mind. So our second step of our 4 is setting standards to always abide by. This is a little bit more textbook, or maybe not the part that's as exciting as creating the design or optimizing the code, but it's incredibly important. And I will include an article on my LinkedIn following up after this about the RACI methodology. How many of you have done a RACI before? Oh, great. Okay. So a RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. There are various flavors of this, but what this seeks to do is develop layers of ownership. And one thing that I am, I think, most excited about is I finally have won the soapbox battle of getting a committee together to talk about accessibility standards across our entire organization that I currently work for. Before, we had one vertical that had 14 standards that were dedicated to accessibility. Those leaned into the WCGA guidelines, as well as automated and manual best practices for testing, like keyword testing. And so what we did here is an exercise assigning who needs to be accountable for that. We're still working through these other rows, but I feel really good knowing that we're starting to talk about accessibility inclusively. And these standards will be available for all developers, which is then going to make teams continue to develop more tooling and more process, kind of decentralizing all of that. We are nowhere near being AA compliant, and there has been a bit of a debate to this point of, well, we know all of our products aren't inclusive, so why would we do this? It's to motivate us to be inclusive. And a RACI and having goals in place, like objective key results, help hold the business accountable. If you work at an organization, I challenge you to be thinking about how might you just plug accessibility? Or how might you think about this in even an early way for your website? Take that ownership and know that anything you touch, if you take a moment to think about accessibility, you are making something better. And as I mentioned, bringing people into this process. Accessibility is a journey, it's multifaceted, and especially as we continue to go through my last two sections here, there's a lot. It can feel overwhelming, and leaning into people is an incredibly important part of this process. All right, section 3, I'm biased, this is my favorite, and this is using tools, design systems, and components. I love this so much because I think of a design system or components as the building blocks. And I was absolutely obsessed with Legos. I don't know if anyone has gotten into adult Lego building. I'm currently building the office set, and I'm about halfway done. And it's so delightful to be thinking about kind of like each step in the process you go through gets you a little closer to having this almost like beautifully finished piece of artwork. And regardless of how you look at what you build, whether it's more technically oriented, more like usability oriented, or more about aesthetics, if you think about the building blocks of your experiences first and make those components accessible, your entire experience is more likely to be inclusive as a whole. A great example of this is as I was creating my speaker profile on the website for this event, there was caption text. I could add alternative text for my headshot. And I debated for a while, do I try to describe what I look like? What kind of attributes should I add? And I actually revisited best practices for this and then added in a caption that met what alt tag requirements should be. Considerations for each component. So there are 5 primary considerations I'm calling out here. Those of you that have started to dig into WCAG or are familiar with accessibility, there's a lot. And I wanted to distill this down to a few tangible ones that really can be early and semi-easy to adapt to. The first is contrast ratio. This is making sure that you have that perceivable way for users to discern what they are viewing. This can be a debatable topic because oftentimes when you have imagery on websites, it's visual filigree or additive. I argue that any visual you add should have value. So if it's telling your story, make sure that it also falls in contrast ratio. If you download extensions, like you'll see maybe up there, they're very tiny, but I have like VisBug, Wave. There are a bunch of free tools that you can use, especially in Google, that help you check for quick things regarding contrast ratio. Your text, I recommend making that always black, and if you're on a colored background, don't make it white. You'll notice on my slides that my text is slightly off-white. And what that helps you do, if you add in a little bit of gray, is soften it. It just makes it a lot more readable to the eye and makes it not as harsh, especially for users that have astigmatism or have other visual impairments. So the next one I want to cover here is perceivable states. This is the default. Hover, focus, and in active states for your software being, or your components specifically, being understandable and predictable. Which leads us right into tabbing order. So how many of you have done keyboard testing, or even on a website, just like tab through, use your arrow keys? It is a fascinating experience. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've done that and gotten stuck. Like, if I give myself the challenge, then you're thinking of, okay, how do I get around this thing? Or why won't it get to the button? I need to be able to commit this action. And it's all about semantics. It's knowing the order that the elements are being called to in your code. And this is an area that is really critical to work through, because as assistive technologies, like a screen reader or if somebody is using their keyboard, is going through elements, they need to, it needs to be in the correct hierarchy for the page to present the things in the right order. Next, responsiveness. This is our keynote yesterday, I believe, called this out as like the mobile era, where everyone was saying mobile first design. I don't say mobile first design, I say user first design. As I called to before, over the pandemic, media queries have adjusted. The world is ever changing. I have a Google Pixel 4. Fingers crossed it lasts me, I don't know, hopefully another year, because I'm not a trendy phone person. Some people are. I mean, there are a multitude of devices. We now have folding phones again, thanks to Samsung trying to copy, I think it was Mozilla a few years ago. And those may not have fully taken off yet, but it does lead to some questions. If you're using a phone device like that, is the real estate being cut in half? Because you can have two tabs open at the same time. Is someone mirroring the same content, and why? And the one thing that I see more often than not as I'm working with designers and developers at Acquia is that responsiveness is one of the last considerations, because we often are designing desktop first. I call it the good old 90% rule, which is 90% of our users use desktop, and when we look at the data on Google, it tells us that almost all of our users, actually like 98%, use desktop. Why do you think that is? I don't know if anyone has any inferences there or thoughts.
Self-fulfilling prophecy?
Yes, because we design that way. We are like our users, because they're doing a lot of complex tasks. I'll use the dam as an example. You know, they're downloading large batches of content. They're uploading massive media files. They're doing metadata editing. And then in our like Drupal cloud products, the Acquia Cloud platform, they're managing their sites. And so, of course, a desktop is a very reasonable place to be doing this on those huge monitors. And when we've done field studies, you will see users that have 3, 4 screens. And they'll have a tab where they're uploading, a tab where they're editing, a tab where they're managing their site, and they're all like this. And if they happen to be a creative, they might also have a code module open, or they might have other different things that they're working on in like InDesign or Figma. But we also have users in the field. We have many users that engage with mobile devices. Specifically Pam, who I brought up earlier, she creates portals, which are these easy to use web experiences that pull together content in curated collections. And portals themselves in the desktop experience are very accessible. Users can find content, they can download or share it. But as soon as you get to mobile, around, and I know this because I had to try to download stuff on a portal for my previous boss while I was in a different state. He's like, hey, I need this thing for a client meeting. I pull it up, and half of the content was cut off because we stopped thinking about adapting components down past that 500 region. So how we've started to move a bit beyond this is thinking about really leaning into the component first design. As I mentioned, we look to have our building blocks optimized. And as we're pulling those building blocks into our design concepts, what I have here is a category tree. And I love categorization, which is probably why I worked for 7 years at a company that did taxonomy, which is basically library science for DAM. And what you'll notice is there are certain states I've called out. I have some new ideas here that my team and I put together for how we wanted the chevron icon in that first column to be more responsive. We wanted to ensure that it was pulling in the right states as the user was interacting with it. There are other things that you see I have no notes on, and those are existing components. This is all about communication and making sure that you're calling out actionable elements for your teams to enact as they're transitioning their work into the build cycle. And the last piece I want to call out here is labels. Labels are something that often get, I don't want to say overlooked, but can be really easy to forget because there's the text here. But you want to make sure that that checkbox says select, and you want to make sure that that chevron says expand. So being very clear on what you want the screen reader to interpret that element as it changed states is very important. This is also a door for additional learning and continuous collaboration with your colleagues. I often find when I get to the phase of like, okay, we've had this idea, we've researched, we've created mock-ups, we've user tested it, and I've got some notes and things, now what's next? And often it's thinking about, well, you'll see like that H1 through H6, like thinking of the hierarchy. Oh, I didn't really add super clear text here in this section. We should probably polish that up. So pulling, content folks, just taking another pass, even with a friend. They don't have to work in design, development, or anything of that nature, but making sure that for a first-time user, it is usable, it is understandable. Writing tasks for your components that are inclusive is a great way to get additional data. So testing your components, and this could be a standard usability test. My colleague Jillian yesterday talked about some different testing methodologies, moderated or unmoderated. I've done paper prototype tests where I have people like tap where they think they would be clicking. And it's just a way to understand that human behavior piece I called out earlier, of how that's even evolving as they're going through your user test. What are they learning? What are they keying in on? And what is getting missed? The last piece for this section is documenting it. Ensure your improvements get updated and get out there. And if your environment's like mine, it might be a little messy. We have a UX design kit in Figma. And Figma has launched some wonderful new features lately, which I think the developer mode is my favorite. I don't know if anyone has gotten to use that yet. Highly, highly suggest it. Jillian, you're using that for like one of your projects right now, right? It's amazing. And that's greatly helped with communication, I feel, with some people who have more developer-focused roles. Might not necessarily be as familiar with the design problems, but translating that in a way that gives you those annotations I showed on the slide before that are more user-focused and then the more technically focused. And what I have on the right here is our patterns library that we use for our Beyond product. And here you'll see there are some different labels. We have ready for use and partially accessible. We've evolved to making sure that all of our components in this library have that documentation. So whenever a developer or designer is seeking to use these in their environment, they know what they're getting into. And they have that opportunity to make what they touch better. It is their responsibility to be reading this, updating it, and being accountable to the customers and consumers of our digital experiences. If you take that moment to read this and update that for the future users, you are helping make things better and more efficient in the long run. And lastly here, just a quick note, consumers of digital experiences are going to thank you for keeping it simple. Simplicity is really important as you're designing components and thinking about accessibility. By leaning into less is more, you're focused on things and delivering a quality over quantity experience. Starting small is okay. And it's a way that you can really improve your design system in a bottoms-up way. The last area here I'll touch on in section 4 is measuring what matters. We work in a world that is very data-centered. And being able to quantify the value of how you're spending your time, if that's for yourself, I don't know if anyone here has used the Pomodoro method. I love timing myself. So this is a method where you set a timer, and the Pomodoro method is, I believe, 10-minute or 20-minute increments by default. I like 30 minutes. But you then have that idea of this is my window. This is my window to accomplish this task. And then you take a meaningful break. And so I think measurement, whether you're doing something as simple as measuring a task or looking at not just the time it took you, but the value you brought the users is where I'm going to take this next. So, like I said, Jillian yesterday talked about data. And our keynote also talked about data triangulation. This is a hot topic right now. So if you're interested at all in this word triangulation, what it really means is pulling together 3 or more sources. And being able to leverage those sources, whether it's in the design process or in the testing process or quantification process, to give an output. And here, when we're doing measurement of how accessible our experiences are, there are 4 categories this falls in. The first, checker tools. The second, auditing. The third, optimizing. And the fourth, the user. Some examples here is, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of extensions. And if you want any advice on ones that would work well with your current workflow, let me know. Wave and Axe are a couple. Auditing, you've got 508, Weekend 2.1, VPATs, which I should have added there, are a great methodology that you can use at mid-sized to large organizations, especially with leadership, to show them exactly what needs to be remitted to have your experiences be whatever level of compliance you're growing towards. Then there's optimizing with that UI prototype and UI check, code checking, that could be manual or it could be automated. And then the user, and this goes back to that research, testing, and the various ways that you can prototype. The return of investment. So accessibility first design can really increase the approachability of your business. And when I say business here, I don't necessarily mean business in its classical construct. I just mean like what you're creating. It comes back to inclusion. If you create experiences that are accessible, you will have more people that engage with it. You'll have more individuals that can experience it and share it and broadcast it. Regardless of its purpose, this enables it to have a higher level of growth and a positive perception. Some benefits of ROI and accessibility, this could be SEO benefits, increased usability, and remove accessibility bug fixing time. As you're optimizing those building block components, you're going to see a decrease in the amount of time it takes to release new things. You're going to see your code deploy faster. This also helps support the aging population. Or thinking of people as they're moving through just life in general. You're helping them, and that in turn makes them maybe more loyal. You're reducing legal risk and access to contracts or contacts. If somebody has a great experience when they come to a website or whether they're viewing like content or things they're creating, they're more likely to share it and recommend it to others. I will definitely be recommending this conference to so many people in my design circle and community because this has been a great experience to me for many reasons, accessibility and otherwise. My piece of advice here is meeting your team, business, or partners where they're at. I say this whether it's about accessibility or really about anything where you're trying to elicit change, is that you need to be thoughtful and kind about where others are coming from. And acknowledging that change takes time, especially with a topic like inclusivity, morale and competence are getting built up. You're bringing other people with you, and that's gaining momentum. And with that, you need to be taking time to celebrate your wins. Whether you've done something substantial as like do your first accessibility test, or you've launched your first component that is inclusive and can match those necessary states for users, give yourself a pat on the back, or tell your teammates how much you appreciate them and how much they're valuing users. Enjoy that moment. You can make a difference by doing simple things, by setting that standard, by trying a new tool, by starting to measure things. You will make that difference, and you can make everything that you touch better. Thank you. We have a couple minutes here. I'm happy to take any questions.